Cover 2 with Blaine Bishop and Zach Lyons here on 104.5 The Zone, powered by all Four Seasons Garage Doors. 615-737-1045 is the number. And, of course, we have the F&M Bank Chat on Zone TV, Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook Live. And we're going straight to the phones. We're going to Justin Melo, who's up in America's Hat, up in Canada, and he has an article out over at Titansize.com, why Titans quarterback Cam Ward will keep improving from the man who helped mold him. And it's a great article. Encourage everybody to go read it. There will be some stuff you haven't heard before, because there were some things that caught my eye in here. But something that the fans have heard from your co-host over on Music City Audible, Justin Melo, is that Cam Ward is Patrick Mahomes, essentially, and it got brought up here. Now, he didn't say he is Patrick Mahomes all the time, but what did Coach Eric Morris detail about Cam Ward's game that reminded him of Patrick Mahomes at times?
Yeah, Zach, the first thing was the arm angles. You know, that was something that really impressed Coach Morris, having previously been at Texas Tech, coaching and recruiting Patrick Mahomes. Did the same with Baker Mayfield, by the way. But, getting Cam Ward at first incarnate word and of course, follows him over to Washington State. But he kind of talked about the arm angles, what really, really impressed him, and the decision-making. At one point, he said to me, he makes decisions as quick as anyone I've ever seen, and it reminded me of Patrick Mahomes. Those aren't words I ever thought I'd say out loud ever again. So certainly Coach Morris, being honest, didn't think he'd have another one like that under his tutelage, if you will, especially when you're not coming from one of the blue blood programs and don't necessarily always have access to these, high-end quarterback recruits, if you will. Really, it was the arm angles and the decision-making that first, had Coach Eric Morris reminded of Patrick Mahomes.
Justin, I thought a real interesting part of the article, and listen, I'm a little bit of a football nerd, but how COVID affected Cam learning the offense, how it helped him grow as a quarterback, transitioning from a wing T offense to what Incarnate Word was planning to run. Can you detail how COVID and helped him get to where he's at for Incarnate Word that first year?
Well, that was part of the story I really wanted to tell. I think you said it at the top. The Cam Ward story, especially, since being drafted leading up, it's been told, right? In all honesty, it's been told in terrific detail by a lot of terrific people. I wanted to take a bit of a different angle and maybe tell part of the story that wasn't quite as well known or as well documented. So he first gets there. I mean, that's why focusing on the shift from a wing tee to an air raid, it's got to be one of the biggest changes you could undergo as a quarterback coming out of high school. You really doesn't get much more stark than that. So it really was an interesting coincidence for him, almost a beautiful coincidence, you'd call it. The world was going through what it was at the time, and that just gave Cam Ward, they didn't play football that fall due to COVID. Or programs like Incarnate Word were not playing. It was not top priority during the pandemic. So he had time to kind of come in there. They were practicing against air. Like, they weren't even allowed to do 7-on-7 at first due to the, the guidelines. So he really just was focusing on footwork and learning the system. And it says a lot about quarterback development, in my opinion, right? That, rarely do we get a chance to break it down to that level. No, normally you got to be bouncing, multiple things at once that you're trying to learn. So for him to just focus on footwork and to focus on the playbook, not worry about going out there and actually competing, made a huge difference to his developmental curve. They said finally, after a couple months, they started 7-on-7, which really was just him, again, practicing against the shell of a defense. And then 3 months later, they start 11-on-11. They said by that time, that was really the first opportunity we had to really assess where he was at, right, in this offense, in this playbook. By that time, they were totally blown away by the leaps and bounds he had made.
He says in here that Cam is also a kid like Patrick Mahomes who spends a ton of time in the meeting room. He asks great questions. His mom was a coach, so he's been around that his entire life. What were you able to glean about maybe his mom and that influence of a coach's influence in his life early from Coach Morris that you thought was, man, this is so interesting and such a good sign of things to come?
Well, Coach Morris could see the difference in a kid that's been coached his whole life and wants to be coached, I think, more importantly, right? I think Cam would tell you himself, and he has said it throughout a bunch of his appearances, like, his parents are terrific people, but certainly there was structure, right? And there was discipline, and there was all the great things that come with what a great coach does. And he was getting that at home from his own mother, who coached high school basketball. So by the time Cam Ward got to Incarnate Word, he was used to that. And he would ask tough questions in the meeting room. He wanted to be guided. He wanted to be coached. He wanted to understand the why behind everything, because since a young child, he knew and learned through his parents, again, with his mom having that coaching background, that there was a purpose to everything he did, and that the way that he was parented. So by the time he gets to Incarnate Word, and now he's really got his first really, really good football mind, coaching him, again, playing in that wing T offense was such a different recruiting process for him. So he gets to UIW. This is the first time he's had a real good football coach, in my opinion, a high-end football coach in his life, and he wants to ask questions. Here's his opportunity to learn more, to maximize the environment he's in, really for the first time. And Coach Morris noticed that immediately. This kid loves to be coached, and he asks good questions.
We're on the phone with Justin Melo of Titansize.com, and of course you can hear him on Music City Audible, part of the 440 Sports Network with Justin Graver. And we're talking about his article, The Why the Titans quarterback Cam Ward Will Keep Improving, from the man who helped mold him, an interview of which he talked to Coach Eric Morris. And also, we still got the NFL draft that we need to talk about with you as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, no doubt about it, Justin, man. Thanks for coming on. I guess let's start with the expectation. I think this is two different questions. Expectation for wins for the Titans, and does that, I guess, conflict with a rookie quarterback average starting number of wins, typically on average over the last decade or even 2 decades, that, NFL quarterbacks win a loss record? And would it behoove the Titans to just win 5 or less games so to get another stack in the draft?
That's a good question, because certainly Brian Callahan is feeling some heat going into this year, right, as the head coach of the Titans. If they win 5 or less games, I'm not convinced that Brian Callahan is back in 2026, right? So that's the big question. How many games do the Titans need to win? For me, I think there's a nice middle ground where you can keep expectations fairly low, but also see some improvement, right? If this team wins 6 football games, the sad reality is they will have doubled the amount of wins they had the year prior, right? So if they win 6, 7 games, to me, that is the sign of an improving football team. It indicates that Cam Ward had a pretty good rookie season, right? Because you didn't win 3 or 4 games. If they win 6, 7 games, he certainly led them to a couple of those wins, right? It's not the edge rushing group that's going to lead them to wins. It's not the wide receiver group that's going to lead them to win. So if they can win 6, 7 games, I think that gives Coach Callahan a strong argument. Hey, we're improving here. We doubled our win total from year to year. I've got our rookie quarterback looking pretty good. He had a solid, stellar rookie year, something to build on as a sophomore, and we're trending in the right direction. So I think it'd be a little, you'd be getting away from yourself if you think this team is, hopefully they surprise you. But if you're thinking they're capable of winning, 9, 10 games, I think you're in for it a little bit. But certainly a 6, 7 win team would signal that they are an improving football team, that Brian Callahan has them on the right track. People are forgetting, it's nice to get a high pick. Sure, if they win 4 or 5 games, they're picking in the top 5 again. But what does that do to Cam Ward's development? Chances are you're pairing him with a second head coach in his second season. It's a new system he has to learn, yada, yada. I'm a big fan of continuity, especially for a rookie quarterback. We all remember Marcus Mariota didn't have that here in Tennessee. Whether it was with merit or not, people blamed that for years. Oh, he had a bunch of coordinators. He had a bunch of head coaches. Let's remove that from the equation for Cam Ward. Let's get him through continuity and watch the team get better year by year.
What do you think about the thought process on judging quarterbacks, especially rookie quarterbacks, based off of wins? And the reason why I'm asking that, being a former defensive guy, you got to have a real good defense, too, to help you out, and a run game. And weapons.
Well, you got to have a good football team, right? I think in general, wins is not a quarterback stat, in my opinion. I mean, I look at, for example, Drake May last year. The New England Patriots won, I believe, 4 football games. They had tied for the worst record or second worst record in the entire league. I thought Drake May looked pretty good when he came into the lineup, right? That was a roster that was really, really lacking around him, and that's why you cannot judge Drake May's rookie season based on what the New England Patriots win-loss record is, or was. And I think there's a lesson to be learned there for the Tennessee Titans. This is a roster that is still very much in flux. By the way, it's going to be in flux next offseason as well, right? They've got a ton of players on expiring contracts. They probably should bring a couple of them back, but an Amani Hooker, a Roger McCreary, their top 3 edge rushers are all on expiring deals. And Arden Key, Draymond Jones, and Lorenzo Carter. So this is a team that's still being built, and you saw that in the post-draft presser a couple days later, where Mike Borgonzi and Chad Brinker talked about how they knew that there's a best player available approach because the roster had so many holes. So this is a roster that's in flux. It looks like they've built a good offensive line in front of Cam Ward, which is really important and vital to his development. But certainly, they're lacking talent at edge. I think wide receiver is still a big sore spot unless those rookies just hit gold right away. It's a roster that needs to get better, and that's why you shouldn't judge. Certainly, Cam Ward's win-loss record should not be a reflection of how he played in 2025.
Well, I firmly agree, and I agree with everything you said there. I want to add, the defense as well as a running game always helps a young quarterback. So you talked about pass rush game here. Oluwadejo from UCLA, kind of break down Femi a little bit. And was that somewhat of a reach too early for the Titans, or that's exactly where you thought he would go in somewhere in that range at 52?
Well, I'm a big fan of the kid in general. Got to know him really well throughout the pre-draft process. I'll say I understand why some people might consider it a reach, but I think this is how we should define reach. I always thought Femi was going to go in that range based on the potential and the outside. He had like 11 pre-draft visits. Okay, he had as many pre-draft visits as essentially any prospect in this draft. For the most part, you don't go early. You're going to go early when you're making 10 or 11 pre-draft visits. That insinuates there's a lot of, intrigue. Some people might stop short of the word interest, but there's a lot of intrigue in you, right? And it's easy to see why. This guy, it's almost unheard of. He switches positions mid-season, going from off-ball linebacker to edge. And I think there's a higher floor there than people give credit. Yes, it's a lot of raw potential. He's a moldable player. He's long. He's strong. We know how that gets thrown around. But once you turn the tape on, he's a pretty good run defender, right? And I think that gives him a floor. That should help get him on the field earlier than maybe some people anticipate. Then when you throw him into the mix into that Titans edge room, they got a bunch of number 3 and 4 pass rushers, right? Arden Key ideally is a number 3. Draymond Jones, these are guys who are borderline 2s or high-end 3s. So you throw him in that room, there should be an opportunity for him to get on the field pretty early. Play recognition, that's all stuff he's going to have to pick up, quickly coming into the league. And there's a bit of a question there based on his lack of experience at the position. But because I think he's got that off-ball linebacker background, he sheds blocks well, he plays with a lot of power, he impacts the run game. I do think as he's developing more of a pass rush plan and maybe an arsenal, if you will, there is an opportunity for him to get on the field, think a little earlier than Titans fans realize.
Yeah, well, lastly, I guess I want to ask about the safety guy coming off an ACL, injury. But, man, the year before he looked fantastic. I think this guy could be a superstar. What did you think about where he went in the value that the Titans got out of Kevin Winston Jr.?
Yeah, a lot of people were incredibly high on Kevin Winston Jr. Titans confirmed they had him at the top of the second round, before the injury. So to get him at number 82, and by the way, it was a partially torn ACL, so he avoided, full-blown disaster in that knee. He ran at Pro Day, right, and he ran in the 4.5. So he's on a really, really nice track there, road to recovery. So things are looking pretty good for him. You watch him on tape, he's a versatile skill set. He's long, he's big, he's strong. He's got that, that makeup to play near the line of scrimmage. I think that's where they probably use him early. Big nickel, big dime, 3 safety looks. I think eventually the goal is, remember when they had Kevin Byard here in his prime and they had Amani Hooker as a younger guy? They had interchangeable skill sets, right? Like both Amani Hooker and Kevin Byard were great playing near the line of scrimmage. They were good tacklers. They were good in the run game. They could also cover tight ends one-on-one, but they were also so good, right, being those ball hawks on the back end. I think Kevin Winston Jr.'s got that same versatility. If they re-sign Amani Hooker next offseason, and it's early, but I hope they do and should. He's a good football player. I think Kevin Winston Jr. probably replaces Xavier Woods, who they signed in free agency earlier this year. Could be a bit of a Band-Aid and to help reset the culture in the locker room. I think the long-term plan, you've got Amani Hooker, Kevin Winston Jr. They can both do all of those things I just talked about Kevin Byard did. Winston, again, is a great fit to play near the line of scrimmage due to his size and range, but I also think he's very, very good on the back end. He's got certainly the sideline-to-sideline ability to cover things back there. So for me, this is a really versatile, interchangeable type safety. And again, Xavier Woods said it the other day. He put it beautifully. There's no free or strong safety anymore, right? You've just got to do everything back there. So I think they got a real versatile prospect that's going to come in, help them this year as a rotational guy, and projects as almost a guaranteed starter in 2026.
At the Draft Network, Justin Melo.
Justin, when you look at the drafting of Marcus Harris, and then you see all these undrafted free agents that they have brought in that have similar size that you would project probably at a nickel. Maybe they play safety, but probably at nickel. What do you think that says about Roger McCreary's status with the team? I know you mentioned him as an extension candidate, but it sure seems like they're at least planning for life without Roger McCreary next year, maybe because they can't get a deal done and he's maybe going to command too much money, or maybe it's because they don't want him back. For whatever reason, doesn't look like he may be back based on their actions right now.
Yeah, I think it's hard to predict, and I agree with that assessment. Anyone who's saying, he's definitely coming back or he's not, I think Mike Borgonzi surprised a couple people this offseason. Maybe it was just me, but, Nick Westbrook-Akine, Ryan Stonehouse, and Nick Folk to a lesser degree. I think a lot of people thought, those guys will definitely be back, and none of them were back, right? So it's hard to – one thing we know about Mike Borgonzi that leads me to believe that he likes Roger McCreary is you look at everything he targeted in free agency this year – it was guys that played a lot of snaps. Right? Remember, Roger McCreary as a rookie, led the entire NFL in snaps, and he's pretty much been a 1,000-snap guy. I think this year just fell a little short of that, but he's been about a 1,000-snap guy every year he's been in the league. So he's reliable. He's a little versatile. Remember that first year, he played outside a lot due to the injuries they had. Ideally, he's full-time nickel and plays inside. He's a good football player. If the contract is reasonable, I think they should have him back. I'm not ready to say that they're full, a sixth-round pick I don't think is enough to say they're planning for life after him. But it is interesting that Marcus Harris, the sixth-round corner out of Cal, I do think is a nickel. And maybe that's just a depth thing. They didn't really have another guy on the roster, in my opinion, that could play nickel, right? That's not Darrell Baker Jr.'s game. That's not Jarvis Brownlee Jr.'s game, who's now a full-time boundary starter for them. So maybe Marcus Harris is, we need a guy to back up Roger. If Roger gets hurt, we don't know who we're going to put there. Again, that's not Gabe Judy Lawley. That's not Jarvis Brownlee. It's not Darrell Baker. So I'm hoping it's more so just we need some sort of insurance for him. But certainly any time, you're a guy in a contract year and you're good enough to command a certain number, negotiations aren't always going to be straightforward. They're bringing in, I believe, 6 defensive backs undrafted. Almost makes up half of their UDFA list, which they'll confirm later this week when they have, rookie mini camp. But a lot of those smaller guys, Davion Ross out of Memphis, Clarence Lewis out of Syracuse, a bit safety, nickel, interchangeably. So they're bringing in a ton of DBs, and some of them do project as potential nickels.
When you look at this roster right now, where do you think the biggest concern is? Is it at edge or is it at wide receiver? And why do you think it's whichever one you may choose?
It is edge for me, certainly. I would, I try to stack it like this. At wide receiver, I think, Calvin Ridley, for example, is a better football player than any of the edges on the roster. And I'd almost go as far as saying Tyler Lockett is pretty close to that as well, right? Even an older Tyler Lockett might be about on the same wavelength as an Arden Key or a Draymond Jones. It's similar to the issue they had last year, but potentially worse, where, certainly I understood the need to shed ties with Harold Landry and the bloated salary. But I think, if he was still in that room, he's probably the best edge they have on the roster going into today. There's a reason he led them in sacks last year. So with Arden Key, again, being like a low-end 2, a rotational 3, Draymond Jones, I would say, is about the same. That's why he's on a 1-year deal after failing to live up to the big deal he signed in Seattle after, being a big-time contributor in Denver. So, and then, again, we'll see what Femi is as a rookie. And then you've got Lorenzo Carter, who had 0 sacks last year for a team that desperately needed sack production. So for me, it's by far and away the edge position. It's the biggest hole they have. these 2026 mocks, they're way too early to be releasing them now. But I would say it's, pretty safe bet that it would probably be an edge or a wide receiver.
What is it? Which undrafted free agent should be on everybody's radar right now that they should be like, hey, this guy may actually make the final 53? So which undrafted free agent is that for you?
Well, everyone's going to pick Xavier Restrepo, understandably so, right? The guy who had 1,200 receiving yards with Cam Ward at Miami last year. But there are a couple of interesting ones. The word is that they're bringing in 17 undrafted free agents is what I've been told. Again, they'll finalize that list later this year. But they've got a couple. The rusher out of, Northern Illinois, I believe it is, Devonta O'Malley, had 8 sacks for the program this past year. He tested really well at Pro Day. They're bringing in a corner, I was told, Jalen Kimber out of Penn State, who previously was at Florida and Georgia. Like, this is a guy with a lot of pedigree coming out of college ball. I thought that hurt him. It's the NIL era, but 3 different programs, I think, hurt him from, prevented him from kind of building momentum at any of those programs. But Clarence Lewis out of Syracuse, I mentioned, I think will be a good special teams player and might be able to compete for a back-end role at safety. Isaiah Rakes, I believe, is the guy out of Auburn who can play a little nose tackle. He's a big-bodied guy. Remember, we all thought they were going to draft a D tackle. They don't, but they end up getting about 3 of them, I think it is, an undrafted free agency. So there's a great opportunity for one of those guys to make the final 53. So from what I'm told and what I've gathered, they've got a pretty good haul of UDFAs here. It's going to be 17 of them roughly, barring a failed physical when they announce it later this weekend.
Basically, what is your feelings about Cam Ward year one? Like, what is your prediction? What do you foresee about his career this year?
I think it's exciting. Okay, I think you look at the rookie quarterbacks that had success last year across the league, right? I think Bo Nix was more successful than anyone thought he was going to be. I mean, Jaden Daniels, no matter what you thought, if you thought the world of Jaden Daniels, he probably still exceeded your expectations, right, with the Washington Commanders in year one. I even look at Michael Penix, who came in a bit later and looked okay, I thought, for the Atlanta Falcons. What all these guys had in common was they were very experienced, right? Cam Ward enters here, 5 years of college ball under his belt. He's like, the leader in touchdown passes, something ridiculous throughout his college football career. I think that experience and the ability to master multiple systems, to take a step up, and Cardinal Ward to Washington State, step up. Washington State to Miami, another step up. To handle all of that as flawlessly as he did, when you pair that with the dynamic skill set on the field, the ability, I think, to read defenses and read coverage at a bit of a higher level than he was initially given credit for, pairing all that with the off-script ability, the offensive line they've put in front of them, I think the Titans are going to have a good run game, again, with Tony Pollard, Tajay Spears, and potentially Khalil Maulings, the 6th-rounder, factoring into that a little bit. I think the sky's the limit for Cam Ward as a rookie. Again, we have seen experience be a big-time factor in immediately translating that success in college to the NFL. 5 years under his belt. I don't think a defensive coordinator is really going to throw a whole lot at him that he hasn't already seen and that he doesn't have an answer for. If this was a guy coming in, you look at the young quarterbacks that have struggled and truly have busted over the last couple of years. You go to a Zach Wilson, a Trey Lance. What those things those guys had in common was a lack of experience, right? They didn't play enough college football. They had under, 20, 23 starts under their belt. With Trey Lance, I think it was under 15 when he got drafted number 3. For Zach Wilson, it was just slightly over 20. With Cam Ward, you look at the number of starts he's bringing to the next level. This is a guy that is ready for what is going to be thrown at him. He's landed in a great place. I talked to Coach Eric Morris about that, the way Brian Callahan's going to build and craft this offense around him. The experience that Brian Callahan has doing that, right, doing it in Cincinnati for Joe Burrow. Sky's the limit for Cam Ward. I think he's going to hit the ground running in Tennessee.
Well, we appreciate it, Justin. Of course, you can follow Justin Melo on Twitter, but you also can go to Titansize.com to read his latest article, Why Titans Quarterback Cam Ward Will Keep Improving, from the man who helped mold him, and his interview with Coach Eric Morris. And, of course, you can hear him on Music City Audible with Justin Graver on the 440 Sports Network. Melo, we appreciate it.
Pleasure as always.
Thanks. When we come back, we'll talk about some of the things that Justin Melo talked about, specifically about that defensive comment that he just made right before we hung up the phone with him. This is Cover 2 with Blaine Bishop and Zach Lyons here on 104.5 The Zone.